everybody, it's time for Chapter 3 of All About Sam. In Chapter 2, Sam found a container for the perfume he's making his mom for her birthday, and he put in one of his dad's pipes because he knows that that's one of her favorite smells. Chapter 3. Anastasia, Mrs. Krupnik said at dinner that evening as she heaped chicken stir-fry onto plates and passed them around. Mrs. Parrish called earlier while you were at Daphne's house. She wanted to know if you could babysit with Alexander for a while tomorrow afternoon. Anastasia made a face. What did you tell her? She asked. I told her you'd call her back, of course. I told her I thought you didn't have any plans for tomorrow, but I didn't want to promise without asking you. I hate babysitting, Anastasia said, but I need the money. I wish there were other ways for people my age to earn money. I wish I could be a part-time librarian or something. Is it only for a little while? Are you sure? Mrs. Krupnik shrugged. That's what she said. Maybe an hour and a half. He'll probably sleep the whole time. Anastasia poked at her dinner. Okay, I'll call her after I'm finished eating. Sam wasn't paying much attention to their conversation. He thought babies were very boring. At his nursery school, the girls all played complicated games with dolls, dressing them and undressing them, putting them to bed, feeding them fake food, taking them for walks in doll carriages. Sam thought it was really weird playing that. Sometimes Mrs. Bennet said, Boys, it's okay for you to play with the dolls too, you know, because when you grow up, maybe you will be daddies, and daddies feed babies and give them baths and take them for walks. Sam knew that. In the Krupnik's photograph album, there was even a picture of his dad giving him a bath when he was a baby. There was water all over the floor, and Sam was holding a toy duck. So sometimes at school, Sam tried playing with the dolls, but the girls got mad at him. They yelled and cried and said that they didn't want the babies to be named Rambo and Donatello. They didn't want the babies to drown in the bathtub or to be exploded out of the doll carriages. And if you couldn't do those things, Sam thought, then it didn't seem like fun, taking care of babies or playing with the dolls. Not when there were trucks and airplanes to play with. Not when there were blocks that could be built into high towers and then knocked down with wonderful crashing sounds. So he just continued eating his chicken, smushing one finger in some sauce that had spilled over the side of his plate, and he didn't bother listening to his mom and sister talking about babysitting. Until his mom said this very weird thing. I just love the smell of babies. Sam looked up. Anastasia made a face. The smell of babies, she said. Mrs. Krupnik nodded. I went over to the Parishes the other morning when you guys were at school because I'd bought them a baby present when Alexander was born. But I somehow never got around to taking it over, and now, my goodness, it's been more than 2 months. So I went over to deliver the gift, and the baby was awake. Nancy Parrish had just bathed him, and I suddenly remembered how much I've always loved the smell of new babies. I love the smell of stir-fry, Mr. Krupnik said, reaching for a second helping. Here, have some more rice too, his wife said, and heaped some on his plate. Anyway, I sat there with sweet little Alexander up against my shoulder, smelling of powder and baby shampoo, and I rocked him, and it brought back some really nice memories. Anastasia began playing an imaginary violin. Her mother looked at her and laughed. Would you say that it's your best smell? Sam asked his mother. What do you mean? I mean, your favorite smell? She nodded. Well, I'd call it one of my favorites, she replied. That was all Sam needed to hear. Anastasia, he asked politely, can I go with you when you babysit sweet little Alexander? May, Anastasia corrected patiently. May I? Sam asked. Anastasia sighed. I suppose so, she said. If Mrs. Parrish doesn't mind, I'll ask her when I call. The Parrishes lived very near the Krupniks in the middle of the next block. Sam trotted along the sidewalk beside his sister. He kept one hand in the pocket of his corduroy jacket, where he was carrying a neatly folded Ziploc bag. He wasn't quite sure exactly how he was going to collect the smell of Alexander. The pipe had been easy, because it was just a thing. But of course, he couldn't bring a piece of Alexander home. He would have to collect the baby's smell somehow. A Ziploc bag seemed necessary. Look, Anastasia said, pointing as they passed the Sheehan's driveway. Sam looked and saw a large cardboard box with a sign on its side. Can you read it? Anastasia asked. Want me to read it to you? No, wait, Sam told her. He began to make the sounds of the letters. Was the beginning sound. Was the next. Eee, Sam said third. Free, he announced. He didn't bother with the second word on the sign. If the first word was free, then the second word didn't matter much. He ran up the driveway to the box. It was just what Anastasia had told him. Kittens! He and his sister peered into the box and watched the 5 kittens scampering inside, chasing each other's tails and batting each other with their paws. They watched in delight until Anastasia noticed the time and told Sam they would have to hurry on to the babysitting job. Bye, kittens, Sam said, turning away from the box. I wish Dad wasn't allergic, he said sadly as he trudged along beside his sister. I won't be gone very long, Mrs. Parrish told them when they got to her house. My husband's giving a talk at the Museum of Fine Arts about Etruscan pottery. I told him I'd come and applaud at the end, just in case no one does. Alexander's sound asleep, she said, and led them to the baby's room. If he wakes up, Anastasia, his bottle's in the fridge, same as it was the last time you were here. And you know where his diapers are. Anastasia smiled and nodded politely. Sam could tell from the way she smiled, it was a fake smile, that his sister sincerely hoped that Alexander would not wake up. Sam edged close to the crib, his face against the bars, and peered in. The baby was on his back with both arms outstretched. His mouth was open a little, and there was a little bubble of spit at one side of it. The spit bubble moved up and down slightly as Alexander breathed. Sam sniffed. He couldn't smell anything at all. He moved along the length of the crib so that he was closer to Alexander's head. He sniffed again. Your brother doesn't have a cold, does he? Mrs. Parrish asked a little apprehensively. No, Anastasia replied. I don't know why he's doing that. Why are you making that noise, Sam? Sam thought quickly. He knew he couldn't say to Mrs. Parrish, I'm smelling Alexander. She wouldn't understand that at all. Sorry, he said. I was making rhino snorts. He pointed to the corner of Alexander's crib, where a stuffed rhino was propped on its fat hind legs. It had a thick white plush horn coming out of its nose and a sewn-on smile below. Mrs. Parrish laughed. She turned to leave the room, talking to Anastasia, handing her a paper with the museum's phone number. Sam sniffed one more time, deeply, but smelled nothing. He followed them from room to room, disappointed, touching the Ziploc bag in his pocket with concern. I knew it, Anastasia muttered. I knew it! She put down the magazine she was reading. Sam looked up from the television. He'd been watching a nature show about frogs. When he pressed the mute button on the remote control, he could hear Alexander quite clearly. Alexander was howling. The sound made Sam nervous. One of the good things about the dolls at nursery school was that they couldn't cry. If you wanted them to cry, you had to make the wailing sounds yourself, and that was fun because it gave you a reason to howl and scream. But it wasn't scary at all. It was a little scary listening to Alexander howl. What should we do? He asked his sister. She patted his head reassuringly. You don't have to do anything, Sam. You can watch Frogs of the Amazon. Me, I have to heat up his bottle, change his diaper, feed him if he wants to eat, which he doesn't always, rock him, pat his back, talk stupid baby talk for a while, and then if he doesn't stop crying, though he might if we're lucky, I'll have to implement my never-fail baby soothing plan, which is a big pain in the neck, but it always works. Can I watch? May I? Sam asked. Sure, his sister said, but Frogs of the Amazon is more interesting. Sam thought that was probably true, but if he was going to capture Alexander's smell, he needed to be right there on the scene. He watched Anastasia start the bottle warming in the kitchen. Then he followed her to the baby's room and watched as his sister uncovered Alexander, who was kicking his legs and flailing his arms and screeching. Sam wrinkled his nose. Now he smells, he commented. Anastasia picked the baby up. You have to be careful picking him up because he's so little, Anastasia explained. See how I have to hold his back and head? Sam nodded. It was better than the dolls at nursery school. You didn't have to be careful with them. You could pick them up by one leg or their hair or even their clothes if they were wearing clothes. You could drag them across the floor if you wanted. You could throw them if Mrs. Bennet wasn't looking. He could tell you wouldn't do that stuff with Alexander. Hand me one of those diapers, Anastasia said, gesturing toward the stack of diapers nearby. She laid Alexander on a padded table. Sam handed her a diaper and watched while she lifted the little nightgown and undid the diaper the baby was already wearing. Yuck! Anastasia said loudly. Alexander stopped crying and looked at her. Sam stood on tiptoe and peered at Alexander's bottom. He sniffed. Yuck, Sam said. He pooped. I can't believe Mom loves the smell of babies, Anastasia commented as she cleaned Alexander carefully. She rubbed some lotion on his behind, attached a new diaper, and pulled his nightgown down. Did I wear a dress when I was little? Sam asked suspiciously. Yeah, I think so. Sometimes anyway. Gross, said Sam. Did I poop in my diapers? Yes. Gross, he said again. Anastasia collected the warm bottle, settled herself in the rocking chair with Alexander, and fed him a little of the warm milk. He sucked for a moment, then spit the nipple out, burped loudly, spit up, and began to cry again. Did I? Yes, Anastasia said. Gross, Sam muttered. Anastasia propped Alexander against her shoulder and patted his back. He drooled on her sweater, grabbed her hair, and tugged with one fist, and howled. Anastasia rocked, patted, tried again to feed him some milk, and said a few baby talk things, but Alexander paid no attention. He howled on. Sam watched. He listened. He sniffed now and then. Finally, Anastasia stood up. Okay, she said. Time for the never-fail baby-soothing procedure. Sam followed her, noticing with some surprise that she was going to the kitchen with Alexander in her arms. Through the kitchen, into the laundry room. Sam watched as his sister turned the dial on the dryer. He was very, very nervous. Sam had heard a terrible story once about someone whose cat got into the dryer. Anastasia, Sam asked loudly, you're not going to dry him, are you? Anastasia chuckled. Nope, she said. Watch, Mrs. Parrish taught me this. She turned the dryer on. Then she folded a baby blanket and laid it on top of the dryer. Finally, she removed the howling Alexander from her shoulder and placed him, tummy down, on the blanket. He began to vibrate a little. Within seconds, his mouth closed. He put his bobbing head down. His eyes closed. His fists relaxed. The dryer hummed. Alexander slept. While Anastasia sat on a kitchen step stool beside the dryer, watching Alexander vibrate and sleep, Sam trotted around the house collecting smells. He took a scrunched-up poop-smelling tissue from the wastebasket by the changing table in the baby's room. He picked up a scrunched-up, spit-up-smelling tissue from the floor beside the rocking chair. He put both tissues into a Ziploc bag and closed it tightly. When he got back home, he opened the lab and looked the other way while he deposited 2 tissues into the grape juice bottle. Gross, he murmured to himself, shaking his head. But it wasn't for him to decide, he knew. The gift was for his mother, and now he had 2 of her very favorite smells. He was already wondering what the third should be.